Good morning, sports fans. Your intrepid host here, Max Murray, as we continue to plow through the chess.com bots. We've polished off the 1500 series bots, and now we're going against Joel, a 1600. We beat a 1600 yesterday, also, Pablo. Joel is reputed to not be too concerned about theory, and he's a King's Indian attack player. However, I'll be taking white, as I always do against these bots, until one of them beats me, as I work my way up through the advanced bots towards the higher and higher levels of ratings. So I'm going to start with d4 second best by test. The bot says 1 d4 is classical, and that's true. Although the romantic era of chess, it was all about e4 and the King's Gambit. Not my style. So I expect Joel to play a King's Indian style defense. So what I'm expecting from this bot is moves like knight to f6, 1, which is what it did, followed by g7 and the fianchetto of the bishop to the long dark square diagonal with castles, probably then d6, knight to b to d7, then c5 or e5 as the break, possibly developing this bishop out too on the diagonal. Regardless of all that, I don't follow much theory either, so I play this first same 5 moves against everything, and we're going into it now. We're going into it, folks. Here is bishop to e2, the signature move of my signature opening. Not bishop d3, the more active square, which would signify the Kali system. Now I'm castling my king to safety. I've completed basically phase 1 of my opening system. I've got a share of the center. I've developed my minor pieces on the king side, and I've castled to safety. Plus, I have a strong defensive formation of pawns in front of my king, making me safe from an immediate whirlwind attack. No matter who is playing the black pieces, they are not going to blow me off the board in the first dozen moves, and they are probably not even going to get a miniature against me because of this solid defense. And I don't care if they're Magnus Carlsen or anyone else. All right. So the Joel played d5 immediately. Instead of d6 into the center. I'm not going to be particularly troubled by that. My usual mode now of development from my queen side, which is phase 2 of this opening system, is to play c4, followed by knight to c3, followed by b3, followed by bishop to b2, followed by rook to c1, completing my development. And then and only then do I seek complications. Of course, I could just I could go with a different arrangement of pieces also, but we're going to stick with the basic scenario here. This is a little unusual. So I've been playing these bots. I swept through the 1500s. I just brushed them aside. They played ridiculous moves in the opening as early as the second and third move. Joel here has kept fairly orthodox all the way up until now with this move, 6 bishop to e6, which blocks in his e-pawn. In a King's Indian style opening, the e-pawn break to the center is a critical part of black's game. It is the classical way to play a King's Indian. And you can see now that Joel has rather foolishly blocked in that e-pawn with this very strange move, bishop to e6. So I'm going to take a pause for a minute. Now, first thing I want to point out is it is a developing move. Developing moves are never really wrong, but there are clear drawbacks to this particular developing move. He obviously wants me to exchange pawns here in the center, when his bishop then will either recapture itself or the recapture of the knight will unmask the bishop down this diagonal from where it sits on e6 down to a2. I intend to do neither. Also, he is pressuring. There is an immediate threat here, which is why we look at these moves. We have to determine what is the threat. We always ask ourselves, always. So, do as I say, not as I do. We always look at the opponent's threats, and the threat here is to win a pawn by playing d takes c4. So I have to reinforce this pawn. No worries, I have ways of doing that. I can move my knight to d2 to reinforce it. I can move my queen to c2 to reinforce it. Or I can reinforce it with b3, which would be a continuation of the structure that I normally aim to achieve with my patented opening, which has no name, by the way. If you can suggest a name for this opening here, if you can suggest a name for this structure, I'd be very pleased. Just drop your suggestions down in the doobly-doo. The computers tend to call this a Colley system, even though it's not a Colley system, because in my mind, the bishop has to be on d3 to be a Colley. The reason I don't put the bishop on d3, even though it's more active and objectively it's a better move, is the bishop can become a little vulnerable there from the advancing c pawn, sometimes knights attacking it, and so on, and you start to have to know theory about the Colley. The idea of the Colley is to put the bishop on d3 to support the advance of the e-pawn, perhaps after playing a move like rook to e1, and after playing knight on b to d2, all supporting the advance of this e-pawn, which is the crux of the Colley system. Challenge is, if you're going to play this type of system, and it's a good system and it has its benefits, you do have to be up on some theory, and you can't play this e4 move one move too soon or one move too late. You could get yourself into problems if you mistime it. So to avoid that kind of theory, I play bishop e2. It's also a stronger defensive move since it covers this knight, and a move like bishop g4 would not have the same impact in my position, because I've covered the knight and there's no pin against the queen of this knight, no annoying pin. At some point, I also like to play h2, h3. That creates Luft, the German word for space, or air for my king, and the famous bathtub pawn formation, where that's a very strong and flexible formation because the interior's pawns can advance quite easily. But anyway, we're getting beyond where we need to be. When we have a direct threat, we have to consider. Now, the way I want to produce, the pawns are best protecting other pawns. We don't necessarily want to invest an entire piece in the protection of a measly pawn. However, by playing b3 here and protecting our c4 with a pawn, we're exposing our rook. We do have a strong point in the way, which shields the rook. There can be tactics, though, against that. So I want to be careful when I consider playing b3. I'll play b3. Perhaps then black may offer a pawn, and if this diagonal opens, there could be tactical opportunities against that rook. And the rook, until the b1 knight moves, or the a pawn, that rook is stuck to the a1 square and would be completely vulnerable on prise, as chess players like to say, to the dark squared bishop should this diagonal ever open up. So I'm tempted, considering this arrangement, to deviate. If black deviates, sometimes we deviate also. The idea is our deviation is stronger than their deviation, or our deviation is a refutation of their move. One of my ideas here would be to move knight to d2, and I'll recapture either with the bishop or the knight should he play here. But queen to c2, not bad. I have to get my queen off the back rank ultimately so I can connect my rooks to complete my opening development. The problem with the queen on the c2 is bishop can easily relocate his light squared bishop with no loss of time to the f5 square because it attacks the queen. I could then offer an exchange of bishops, but then he'll probably move here. Now he's attacking this knight, and if he takes the knight, I would have to recapture with the pawn, and I've had my kingside pawn shield shattered. So queen c2 really not on the books considering what might transpire. Another option is, what if we just let black take the pawn, because we can recapture it using many different ways. Black would want to recapture and then support the pawn with another pawn by advancing b7, b5. However, if I move knight to c3 in this particular position, then b7, b5 no longer in the cards. And then I could try to reclaim the pawn with a move like queen to a4 and recapture with the bishop. That's probably a move. Probably. I think after this game I might look at a little bit of the theory behind bishop to e6. It's not likely a move I would face in a tournament against humans, but bots might play it, and I'm not going to poo-poo it because it comes with a threat. So I'm not going to poo-poo it. It's a move that comes with a threat. It might be stronger than it looks. If Black has decided, for whatever setup he's aiming for, that he has no intention ever to touch this e-pawn, if he has some cockamamie plan, then blocking it wouldn't be a downside necessarily for him. Bishop a little vulnerable here, though, because knight g5 would put pressure on it, force it to move again. Although it's question, you have to ask, what is my knight doing on g5 if that bishop moves away? But anyway, let's get back again to what do we do to defend this pawn. I think I'm just going to play b3, defend it, pawn versus pawn. I'm going to rely on this strong point to shield the rook until I can get my knight and my bishop to their most active squares. The best square for my bishop is on the long dark square diagonal, opposing Black's piece, which is the strongest. But also I can move bishop to a3 sometimes. And now with this pawn backwards, it becomes a target. He's likely to play rook to e1, but what good is that if it's a traffic jam for Black on the e8, e7, and e6 squares. So I'm going to play b3 and reserve the choice of where to put the bishop, and probably put the knight on c3. Here comes his knight. He'd like to get into this square. Don't mind. That way I can play a2, a3. Now I can develop my bishop up to the second rank if I need to, which provides support to my king along that second rank. Also allows me to double along the second rank with the other rook once I get my back rank cleared. I'm not afraid of all of this move. It would be a complete waste of time if his knight came in. Now my knight's going to come out. That'll crank up the pressure a bit on this pawn. You can see by playing knight to c6, a logical development square for the knight, but he hasn't touched the c pawn or the e pawn. Now I began this video by discussing King's Indian theory, which says Black is going to play for an e5 break or a c5 break at some time, and there is a very rich theory behind both those breaks, e5 being the more classical move. The King's Indian, an easy setup to play and get against queen's pawn openings, but also an opening with many branches to study. So you could spend a lifetime just on the King's Indian defense. It is the choice of champions and has been for a long time. Maybe a little slightly out of fashion today, but Bobby Fischer played it. A lot of Kasparov played it. A lot of the greatest players in chess history relied on the King's Indian defense as their primary defense to e-pawn moves. I think later Kasparov shifted to the Queen's Gambit declined against queen pawn openings. He said that white can play without risk against the King's Indian for 30 moves, and he didn't see why, as the player of the black pieces, he should allow an opponent to make 30 moves without risk. 30 moves, of course, meaning the person is booked up and knows all the theory, because it is heavily studied, and knows all the theory in those lines. All right, so I could recapture here. I don't think so. I think that's solving some of his problems. One of the challenges he's going to have as black is his position could get a little cramped. He does have a share of the center, but with a cramped position, and his piece is awkwardly blocking his pawns. I might be able to maneuver for a little bit for better advantage. In my opening system, once I get my queenside developed, my typical middle game plan then is to begin operations on the queen side, not the king side. So I'm not after whirlwind attacks. It's not my style anyway. I play on the queen side, and I try to get an advantage here. Black players, particularly human players, like to attack, most of them, Most chess players do, and they look to attack my king side, which is fine because I have a very strong starting position. The knight, good defender. My pawns have not moved in front of my king, except perhaps h3, which could be just as strong a pawn formation as not moving it due to the bathtub, as I mentioned. And they attack me. They do so ill-advisedly. They don't have a justification for the attack, which means when they're not making threats, I can continue my play on the queen side, and eventually I could get an advantage, deep advantage in space, or even actually win material on the queen side while they're busy trying to work up an attack futilely, and win the game that way. All right, so what do we do now? I want to continue my development, and I'm going to put the knight on c3. It's momentarily vulnerable because it is unprotected and loose pieces drop off. Oh, did I blunder? No. I'm defending the pawn with. Okay, I just thought for a horrible moment that I couldn't recapture. Okay, I can recapture with the bishop, or I can recapture with the pawn, or I could ignore it. I don't necessarily have a good immediate way to recapture the pawn, though, later down the line. I could play here. Then what's he going to do? So I could threaten the bishop. If he decides he doesn't want me to break his pawn structure, he's going to have to move this away. Probably just put it here on f5, but then I recapture with my bishop now, and I've got some potentialities, even possibly getting a knight to the e6 square. The less dramatic move is recapture with the pawn, giving me good control of these 4 squares that I've just highlighted on black side of the board. Also opening the B file for my rook. Now I have a half open file for the rook, which conveniently also sidesteps off the long dark square diagonal, which is what in the King's Indian black is typically trying to cultivate as activity along this diagonal, and he does it by the pawn breaks, e5 or c5. However, Joel has abrogated that opportunity from himself. We're going to play just classical here. Okay. So that's his scheme. Look, that was the whole plan. I didn't really recognize it's now good, so I've learned something. Of course, this move is new to me, very new to me. So I probably should have spent more time thinking about how does black coordinate his pieces around this e6 bishop. Now, the previous bots I fought against the 1500s played bad moves and generally didn't coordinate their pieces. The 1600 bots are playing bad moves but getting coordinated on them. So here is a very unorthodox opening, but now we have some coordination. I can move my queen to a4, providing support for that pawn and threatening the knight. Maybe he'll support the knight by playing b6, which does throttle the half open b file. Don't have an easy way to remove that knight except perhaps by playing bishop to d2 to get that knight off the a5 square. But they said knight on the rim is dim. So apart from being on the rim, now he can play here, but I can play here, I can play here. Now, okay, so this is kind of a key moment in the opening. In my system, if I can get in d5, it usually means that I am going to get a significant advantage. My opening system does not really offer me the opportunity to get an advantage in the opening, as black can adopt any sort of defensive setup against it. I'm not directly threatening anything. And I don't expect to get a large advantage, but what I do expect is to get a solid position, and most often, believe it or not, most often, you can put it in your computer, white with this setup will get a sliver of an advantage. The black's best option, in my opinion, to defend my opening setup is to play symmetrically. If black plays symmetrically with just a little more juice, like maybe moving the bishop out, the light squared bishop out of the pawn chain before he seals it, or playing c5 early, black can equalize. And then it becomes a really question of who's going to give who the hanging pawns, who's going to give who the isolated pawn, and I've learned to be comfortable with either. I can play with hanging pawns. I like to play with hanging pawns, actually. That's my preference. And I can play with an isolated queen pawn, although I still prefer to play against the isolated queen pawn. But let's focus again on the immediate threat and the potential replies. So here is the target. Now, we can defend the pawn, and I could do that by queen to a4 as discussed. Or we could counterattack, or we can move the pawn. So let's defend the pawn here. That seems to be only the real way. I could make some bizarre move like this, but I don't believe that's helping me. That would defend the pawn also. So what I'm saying is knight on f to d2 would defend the pawn also. That's very passive and moves my knight from one of its best squares. I like to keep this knight in my system around the king. I'll often vacate on the queen side with the other pieces. I'd get them going all over here on the queen side, but I'll leave this knight behind just in case to defend my king. Remember, black is, as a human player in particular, is most likely to attack my king's side even without provocation, even without justification, and therefore I need to keep a piece close. And the knight and king coordinate very well for defense. All right, so the other thing is move the target, and I could go to c5. That gets me space, and that is tempting. And then the final, or one of the final options is to actually play d5, d4, d5, taking advantage of the awkward position of this bishop, forcing it to move. So let's look at that. d4, d5, probably bishop to f5. Then I might play bishop d3, right? With the idea, if the bishops exchange, my queen comes to the d3 square. That's usually a good square for her in this opening setup. It's more centralized, and now she's off the back rank, so I can connect my rooks. Something I have to be careful about, though, and I've discussed this before, is if I vacate this d pawn strong point on the d4 square, I will open up that dark square bishop beast, the beast sitting on g7 against my very still vulnerable rook. I want to get my rook out of there before I consider opening this diagonal, probably. So I think d5, as tempting as it seems, is out. I may play c4 if he or c5 if black challenges it with a move like b6 and I exchange, then black could end up with a queenside pawn majority on the outside. However, I will have two pawns in the center, which are advancing against pieces, and I think that is advantage to me. Even an outside pawn majority, if black gets it, is not particularly dangerous until much later in the game. And the central pawn majority would be more significant. Queen e4. I'm threatening the knight, so the queen comes out with tempo, which is good. We know we have to get the queen off the back rank to connect the rooks, and if we can do so with tempo, that's all the better. We're gaining time. One of the many features of my opening system is how fast it is. My original conception, when I decided I would start playing bishop e2, even though it's unfashionable for white in the queen's pawn openings, is speed. I've basically developed my king side, got to share the center, and castled as fast as humanly possible in chess. 5 moves. Then I want to keep that speed up and get an advantage in development. But because black has not arranged his pawns, he's kept up in terms of minor piece development with me. So I don't know if speed is of the essence anymore. If he was behind in development, the speed may be of more consequence. So I want to keep the pawn on d5. This could be coming next. So queen to e4 followed by c5. The c5 move, the knight is now defended. He's attacking this strong point, and this dark squared bishop could come alive on the long squared diagonal. However, I could move a rook to the d file. I could also attack this pawn, and so it's questionable. Can't ignore this. I got to do something with it. Let's go ahead and move the queen off. I don't know if that's best. It's not particularly my style to go fishing with my queen like this. The c5 is a legit response. Moving the queen to b3 is out, though, because of the knight. c2 is out, like I said, because of shenanigans with black's light squared bishop. So she's going to have to go somewhere. She can't go to e2, which is where I usually like to put her. And I find, in general, putting the queen on d2 in my opening system is no good, because this diagonals can sometimes become an option for my dark squared bishop, and I don't want my queen clogging up that diagonal. So we're going to go here. Okay, he played, Joel played c6, a less active version than what I assumed would be the reply, c5. So c6 instead of c5. He's playing a delayed Caro-Kann, so to speak. It's definitely the c6 Caro-Kann type pawn, or a Slav. Now he's kind of Slavy going on, the c6 Slav pawn. But does not pressure my center. Now I want to develop my bishop so I can connect my rooks, or possibly bring my rook to b1. If I move my rook to b1, he's going to have to come forward. I don't mind if he comes forward with his pawns on the queen side. That just brings him closer to me. And like I said, what I'm trying to do in my opening system is get a lot of activity on this queen side. On the queen side half of the board. So that's everything from the d file. Everything from the d file to the left, those 4 squares. That's the queen side over here. So this is where I intend to get an advantage. And if black wants to attack my super solid king side, he can. I'm perfectly willing to sit back in defense, fend him off, and continue to work the trumps I have on the queen side. We have equal number of pawns on that side. I have 2 central pawns, which is an advantage. It would imply that a move like e5 is in the cards, because of the advance here and an advance here, and I should mobilize. It's a majority too. Central pawn majority is just another pawn majority. When you have a pawn majority, you want to mobilize them. So I want to mobilize my central pawn majority. If I do that too, then I reserve the option of developing the bishop on this diagonal as mentioned earlier. So I might just do this with tempo. Also cuts this queen off a little bit. I don't think the queen would ever do that. It gets off this diagonal. Remember, this knight is still loose, which is a bit of a worry, and now it's been dominated by his move c6, so that is a hidden advantage of the move c6. It controls these squares on b5 and d5, thus dominating my knight. However, the knight is very well placed here because it does support the advance e3, e4, a la the Kali system. My bishop then would have been better placed, probably on d3, although that d file is where the rook wants to go. And then finally, complete my development, which is kind of one of my schemes. I like to complete my development before I start any shenanigans. And I think what I'm going to do is, contrary to my normal system of putting the bishop on b2, because this knight is sitting here, I think I'm going to place my bishop on the d2 square, because now when my other knight moves, I have threats against this knight. On the other hand, I'm blocking that d file, which could become very important. This d file could become very critical. Oh boy. We're going to play bishop to b2, defending the knight, counteracting his dark squared bishop. Here comes the queen to b6. I didn't really think this was good. I mentioned it in passing, and the reason I don't think it's particularly good is because I wanted to bring my rook to the b file anyway, and now the rook would be opposing a queen. You want to put your rooks in opposition to the queen because it often leads to tactical opportunities. The queen's strongest piece on the board, but also the weakest in the sense that it can be bullied and pushed around. I also have here attacking the queen with the pawn, but the obvious and immediate threat, of course, is queen takes bishop, and that's the threat that I need to respond to. If queen took bishop, though, I could recapture with the knight. So let's look at that sequence. I attack the queen with my pawn. It takes my bishop. My knight is hanging. I take the knight. Now my knight is no longer hanging because it's protected by the queen. But then he does something like this. Now my queen has to move, and it's in trouble. So we're going to get rid of this wacky idea. We're going to write that wacky idea off. Notice the pressure here on the c-pawn. We're going to play probably here, and then I might have to relieve this pressure by playing c6 and then getting this pawn going. So he's got some pressure, you know. He's creating threats. He's creating threats, stalling my plan. He's going to probably bring a rook to the d file to make it harder. Maybe a rook here to the c file also. So he's probably wanting to do something like this. Protect the bishop. Okay. Oh yeah. Okay. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Good move. Oh yeah. All right. I'm aware of moving my queen to the c2 or d3 square runs into this bishop move. What I forgot was moving my rook to b1, and this is a good learning experience for me now as I get the feel of these positions. I played hundreds of games, but I'm just not used to this funny bishop being on a weird square. Okay, now that's a problem. That is a problem because I can't interpose with my bishop because my queen is left home, which was probably the fruit of my problems. I'm under attack. If I move the rook away, I drop the bishop, and we have to go into this line again where I try to take that knight in return for the bishop. However, I will have the advantage of covering this knight. So my idea is, first of all, the first immediate thing is just flee from the threat. I'm covering the knight. The problem is, once he takes this bishop is going to be hanging. So even if I recapture with the knight, the queen is going to come over and grab this. So I can't allow that. I can't allow that at all. The other option is to counterattack the queen, force her to play a move. If bishop takes rook, then pawn takes queen. I think I'm going to have to play that. So let's go through it. Pawn to c6. The queen now has to move. The idea is I want to get the queen away from my bishop. Take your eyes off. Get your grubby hands off my bishop so that I can move my rook away, having failed now to this rather active move. The queen would have to move, most likely. If she comes to any of these squares, I can exchange my queen for her, and that will probably save this bishop. Obviously, she can't go here, so I go here. She'll have to go here, or possibly here. All right, so I think this is the defense. she retreats. Now the pressure's off the bishop. This little demonstration has come to an end, thank goodness. My bishop still has to move. My rook, which is unfortunate because it's a waste of my time. I wasted my time. But I, in the process, learned something. So where does this rook go? My idea originally was the d file would become important. Sometimes when we play closed positions, which is what d-pawn openings mostly end up as, where to put the rooks and how the position is going to open is the critical question in the middle game, and often the key to victory. It was something that Akiba Rubinstein was particularly good at. He was a pioneer in playing with the d-pawn. The Romantic era chess was usually e-pawn. Rubinstein would play with the d-pawn, also Pillsbury, and Rubinstein had a knack for opening the position at the right moment with his pieces optionally placed. And there you go. So out of the darkness, out of the medieval age came Akiba Rubinstein. So where do I put the rook now? Back on the A file doesn't seem productive. C file possible. That's the natural home for the rook in my opening. It's defending this pawn and the knight, which may be important if black tries to open the position. He can't do that right now. My queen rather... It was a mistake putting my queen there. I don't think that was the proper move. I'll have to analyze it with the computer, like I said. D file behind a pawn that is very likely to advance. It still leaves the E file open. Also, rook on the D file now allows me this operation where I can move my bishop to D3 and try to get this bishop slicing through my position out of there. If it relocates here, that's the problem, though. It'll shatter my pawn, so I'd have to move back, and we would go back and forth. If I come to the D file with the rook, which is where I'm thinking right now, now the queen is deprived of retreating. Actually, she cannot come back to either C2 or B3 due to the minor piece activity of black. Making her slightly vulnerable. But I don't see her getting trapped. She does have outs, as they say in poker. Problem with C5, and a lot of times when I play this opening, is it's ill-advised because of counterattacks against the center of the pawn chain. Particularly if black had a pawn on D5, which they don't. And I've lost games that way. It's tempting to gain the space with C5, but it comes with the drawback is the pawn is highly advanced and can be undermined. I'm going to put the rook on... I'm going to protect the knight. I'm going to do a little funny move here. I might move the queen back. I'm going to have to move the queen back now, or I can play fiend to capture this way. So black played actively. Black's playing well. This is by far the most resistance I've gotten from a bot so far. They set up, chess.com set up the 1500, the three 1500 chess bots, and I knocked them down like Skittles. I played the 1600, first six of the three 1600 bots yesterday. I didn't have a problem. I was up material early, and I think I had a winning position early. Okay, this move, attacking the queen, could come forward and attack the knight, bypassing my c-pawn. However, according to the rules of chess, I can capture en passant. And I just want to say, en passant is usually the best move. 95% of the time, in any situation, you can look at it on your computer, where there is a chance for an en passant, it is the actual best move in the position. It is rare that we decline them. However, if I attack here, he could retake with the queen. Now he's back on this bishop. I might have to retreat it to A1, a miserable square. Also, he could bring the rook, and he's actually beating me on the queen side, at least temporarily, especially in coordination with this bishop. He's coordinated very well on the queen side, and I'm actually kind of amazed and flabbergasted that he was able to work this bizarre move, bishop e6 early. When did he play bishop to e6? I'm just looking at the score here. He played on move 6. Now we're on move 14, and the bishop has been quite productive. I didn't challenge it early. What I probably should have done is I should have focused on that bishop. I should have tried to dislodge it. I should have tried to trade it off. Because, I'm afraid always of the dark squared bishop in these King's Indians. That's usually the plum of black's position, but this light squared bishop is doing yeoman's work. Now, back to the threat, which is my queen. I could move the queen back to d1, which is one of the reasons I moved the rook to c1 instead of d1. And then I could play bishop b3, and if he tries to pin the knight, I've covered the knight with the queen, and then I play h3, the bathtub, and he either has to exchange for the knight, which my queen recaptures, or he has to come back possibly to e6, where he's attacking this pawn, but that's covered by my knight. But it won't be covered by my knight if black plays b5, which is coming next. I could move the queen to the b5 square to stop that pawn from advancing. I want to set a knight here, actually. No, not a good way to do it, except I could play here. So one possible plan is retreat the queen to d, right? Play a3, that gets out of this possibility, and then play knight to a2 and knight to a b5, and he'll have to get his own knight out of the way in order to dislodge my knight. We will have 2 pawns against 1. Otherwise, I go queen to d1. If he advances the pawn, and he may damn well do that, I do have squares. This is still potential. No, not a potential. Let's go back to d1. I'm a little discombobulated, and you might have noticed that I'm struggling. Now comes the knight to the outpost. Yep, he probably wants to follow up with a7, a5, and he's getting progress on the queen side, like I said. Now I have a choice. Now I have a lot of choices here. One is I don't like pieces on my side of the board, knights outposted. I play very poorly against them. But if I take, how is he going to cover this pawn? Look where it is. Okay, yes, you have the open b file now, but I can just retreat maybe just to here. The move is probably exchange the knight off. Notice the threat is knight takes bishop. We'd like to look at knight jump. So he's vacated the square. The queen can come there. That's a potential problem if I move the bishop to either to a1, because then it's attacking the a2 pawn, or if I move the bishop to the a3 square, because then the bishop is being directly attacked. However, the knight still is covering this pawn, which is important. And I can maybe get help for the pawn along the second diagonal. Possibly play this once this exchange is effectuated. So bishop takes knight, pawn takes, and then at some point, either right away or later, a4, to get this pawn out of the way of all these praying pieces coming for it. Interesting. It's an interesting game thus far. I'm very impressed with Joel. Here we are, move 15. I have no clear advantage. Actually, I think I'm a little bit on the back foot, unless this move is potentially dubious. If I take with the light square bishop, now, I remember I talked about this whole sequence of let's get rid of his light square bishop, which is really harassing me in this position, really causing problems for me in this position. Then this knight will be ensconced, and I've got to do something immediately with my bishop. This is passive, so we're going to take it. Okay, so I've removed a major thorn in my side and got rid of a piece that in general I don't play well against, which is knights outposted on my side of the board. Historically, I've done very poorly against them. Okay, so queen likely to come to the A file. This bishop now, I can't oppose it. I could start playing for E4. I want to threaten this pawn maybe even right away. I can remove the knight now, perhaps. Although, look, there is an embryonic attack here happening. There is the seeds of my destruction in the position. You could try to exchange the knight. So I've got to be careful in the time I spend to grab this pawn. But once I get this pawn, he's going to have problems. This knight dominated by a pawn not in a good position. I could move it here. That would deal with the light squared bishop and open up the rook on the c file. This pawn potentially could be harassed by the queen, but I could defend it with the bishop. He still can't bust open my strong point, so this bishop can't come into the game yet to helping him on the queen side. Look at all these arrows. I'm sorry about that. But I am talking stream of consciousness. I hope you're enjoying my ramblings. Might want to move the knight now to here, threatening the pawn. The sooner I get rid of that, the better. Oh, look, this is where he's going to go. He's going to go there. That's the idea. Now I see it. Now I see it. That's the idea. Wow, this light squared bishop. Tearing me up with this light squared bishop. Tearing me up. How am I going to defend this square? Knight right now here. I might have to do it. I can't play here. If I go here, he goes here. Now the bishop, yes, I agree, it's deep in my position. It's a thorn in my side. It's a Damocles sword hanging over my head. But it's not striking at anything, and I've already castled. And I can still get to this thing by playing here. I want to prevent that, though. I'm not really on my back foot. Once the knight comes away, then he'll attack here looking for mate. I'm going to have to do something like g6. That's undesirable at this point. Weakens the light squares around my king when I no longer have a light squared bishop. Wow. Wow. Well, Joel, you're tearing him up, baby. You're tearing me up. You're tearing me up. And he's going to get this open B file in conjunction with all this garbage. A delayed H3. I think the whole seeds of these problems that I'm having, apart from the fact that I might have missed more accurate moves later, is queen to A4 just kind of messed me up. It just kind of messed me up, and that's my main learning here. I need to keep the queen coordinated with the light squared bishop. I can't just move her to the side of the board. He had a good refutation, I thought, in C5, but turns out C6 was equally strong. He is taking risks, however. If I could bust him here and get this pawn, then he's got nothing. Except here. I got to deal with this bishop. Here, here, and here might be my... I'm going to force... He's going to put a rook on this. Okay, I'm not going to allow the bishop into my position. Here comes the attack against my dark square bishop. My plan really was to bring it back to A1, where I keep an eye on that knight, and the bishop is guarded by the rook, and I'm still got the long dark square diagonal opposed. If I move the bishop to the A file, it can be definitely double attacked. I'm gonna pull it back to the A1 square. Not optimal, but bishops are long-range pieces, and there was no future on A3 for the time being. So I'm not concerned. Is Joel thinking? What's going on here? The bots usually move instantly. Oh, he played knight G4. Okay, sorry, I missed that. Now the attack that I was concerned about. F5. I've played against these attacks, like I said. I'm used to them. I know about them. Normally I like to have knight here to defend that H pawn. I knew move my knight would be a problem. But F4 is typically the resource that I'm going to use in this situation. I've talked about G3. The problem is the weakening of my light squares. Not good. I play F5. I grip this square. He could play something like that. I try to kick the knight. I could just throw my king's pawns forwards against these pieces. Not a bad idea. I got to get them out of my hair. I have to take certain risks now because I don't think I have a good situation going. The bishop on A1 has the salutary benefit, if you want to call it salutary, of defending the B2 square. So he can't get the rook to the 7th. Nimzovich said you want to get rooks to the 7th rank so they can attack the pawns laterally, and he described it as a hog. So getting the hogs on the 7th rank is what black wants to do, but my dark square bishop is stopping that. This would continue my dark squared fortress, but it does keep my bishop locked in. Remember, bad bishops, though, protect good pawns, and the D pawn is critical right now for me because I don't want black getting this final minor piece involved. So the choices are here and here for the defense. If I go H3 now, it's checkmate, so H3 is not an option. I could put the knight back. But then he comes in with the bishop to D3, and that's what I want to stop. So by moving F5, not only does that block an important attacking diagonal from the B8 square down to my H2 square, it also opens up more second rank defense. And I've learned playing this opening system hundreds of times that I often need a piece supporting my second rank from these types of attacks. So let's go with this. The rook is behind the pawn. Oh my god. Oh my god. The wheels are falling off the wagon. I might have to resign at this point. Oh my god. Oh my god, Joel. What have you done? What have you done? Do I have some ridiculous resources? I'm going to lose a rook. I'm going to lose the exchange. Possibly this pawn. Don't panic. Let's not panic. Let's try to teach you something here about not panicking. At least you'll learn that. Don't panic while you're being dismantled. Now I'm in a losing position. For sure. Okay, so talked about F5, and that's usually a resource for me. For some reason it wasn't because my E-pawn wasn't guarded. Probably because I usually have a queen, on D2 or E2. Yeah, I didn't think about what are his captures and all that. I just fixated. My queen's got to move. Where does she go? Not too many good squares. Not too many good squares. I'm going to still play this game that I'm knuckling down. Now you're going to see some chess. If I move my queen off, this comes, and that's just going to be lights out. So I'm going to put the queen here. She's defending both of these. King's got to recapture. Alright, now you're going to see some chess, guys. Now it's going to go down like Donkey Kong. Okay? What is it? He's up the equivalent of a piece. He's up 3 material points. He's got the exchange. But there's a pawn here that's vulnerable. I'm going to put my knight. I'm going to bury my knight here. He can't play bishop here. He can't get this pawn yet. He can threaten though. My king is open. We're going to play some chess. Once I get my knight to this b6 square, then the b file is shut. This pawn, okay, and I'm getting some material back and defending what is now a backward strong point. I can also replace the knight, but then this comes. Not if I can get this. So we're going to play somewhat quickly now since I'm dead lost. There's no threat here particularly. So, I mean, he's got to defend some stuff. Yeah, he wants the pawn. He wants the pawn. And then he's going to come here. He can't. Okay. Defend a pawn with another pawn. He's coming after the backwards pawn now. He's coming. I told you he'd be coming. He wants to be quick, but his bishop is not on the best square for this. He could play here. Either way, drops my queen. So I think my queen is going to have to relocate. Kind of like her on there because the machine might be fooled into thinking the A pawn is important. The queen also important here on the second rank to watch both pawns. I can also watch both pawns from the F2 square. As my heart rate goes up. F2 not bad, shielding my king a little bit. Not blocking any of my other pieces. He's going to want to go here to defend the pawn and attack the knight. Then I'll cut it off though. I don't have to defend the pawn immediately because he would lose the exchange taking it. It'd be 4 points for 5, which gets me closer back into the game. These two bishops are strong. Still potential penetration to my position along the b file, but the rook, my bishop is doing work. I come here. Now, even if he brings the rook down, I can take. Seems a little uncovered, but now the queen is bothering his e-pawn. I've got to take this off. If I move here and he plays rook to b4, now the knight is in trouble. The knight's got to go here. Then I can try to trap the rook. So it's possible rook b4 is not really a move. So let's say I go to queen c2, which is where the queen I think wants to go. I have to be defensive here instead of attacking pawns that are well defended. So queen f2, defending those pawns. Rook b4, attacking the knight and defending the pawn so I can't capture it with the rook. But problem. So I go queen e2, attacking the pawn. Okay, no, I thought about trapping it, right? So that's what we're looking at. So queen f2, defending these two pawns. Rook to b4, knight to b6. He could sacrifice the exchange for it, but we'll leave that off now. Now that I'm threatening bishop to c3, attacking the rook could retreat to b5, defending the pawn. And I really got nothing I could take here, though. It's a little... Or I could just go queen e2, rook b4, rook takes pawn, defending the knight via x-ray. Rook takes rook. The material exchanges benefits him. Queen takes pawn. Now my queen is here. I'm still down, but fighting. I've got to get this pawn before he weaves it into his web of deceit and lies. Alright, we're going for the pawn. Okay. We're going for the pawn. Oh, comes all the way down. Comes all the way down. Look at that. I didn't consider it. Of course, my rook vacates. Used to having 2 rooks down there. It's interesting. You see how unusual moves lead to unusual positions, and unusual positions lead to mistakes. Because I'm just so ingrained to think I've got 2 rooks connected on my last rank that if one rook moves away, the other rook is covering, and that's not the case here. Now, tactically speaking, that I mean I should have considered rook b1, but I didn't. I could attempt to trap the rook by moving bishop to b2. That's quite nasty for him. The rook is protected. This knight is now pinned. I don't know if I can get this rook easily out. Second rook will come, and then it could be lights out at that point. I could move rook. I have to deal something with the rook, the bishop, right? So the bishop has got to come to b2 or to c3. This second rook is going to come over. If I come to c3, I'm attacking that pawn. It might, again, like I said, I could fool him. Is it the end of the world that he's down here? Move my king up to get out of the pin. It's not necessarily the end of the world, and he's still got to play reasonable chess. I could just be collapsing. Yeah, I'm just collapsing. Might have to resign, folks. It's just been a horrific beating. Okay, but now this rook is open. I'm going to have to go here and sacrifice a pawn just to free this rook. Wow. Wow, I've just been clubbed. What a beatdown. What a horrendous beatdown this has been. What a horrendous beatdown. Well, how could I defend it? I should have gone bishop to b2. He could have caused me all kinds of problems, though. I think I'm just lost. Wow. I'm going to give props to Joel here, and it's good that you see this. Now you're going to see me playing black against Joel. It's almost resignable. I'm already down the equivalent of two points of material, and I'm going to lose a second rook. Should I hang on? Do I have any trumps in this position at all? I will have a knight on a good square. Sometimes a knight outpost on the 6th rank can be worth a rook. I can go here now, though. Now this comes with check. I can't leave the rook alone. Only way to save the rook is to play here. Takes. Gonna try and save the rook. Okay, we're gonna try and save the rook. If I come here, it's the only square available to the rook. Bishop. Let's get this thing out of my hair. I want to play this first. About to drop this pawn. No. I thought it was better if he took here and then just captured my pawn and just take me apart. He's going to steal the slicing and dicing bishops. Take me to church. Wow. I'm down the equivalent of 3 material points again. Still fighting. It's a lost cause. It's basically the Alamo at this point. It's basically the Alamo. Where I want to put the bishop. Take me to church. Here. I have a passer. I do have a passer, and it's protected by the knight, so things are starting to coordinate. I want to. Oh boy. If I go here, the advantage is he might think his queen has to stay tethered to this a5 pawn. What are his threats? There's a check here. I mean, we should look at that. That's fine. I think I need to move my king at some point anyway. He's going to get this queen on the long light square diagonal. That'll probably be the way I die. I'll probably die along this diagonal. That's my early prediction. If I go here, then the pawn can advance. So let's go here. He wants to attack that. That's fine. I think that's a mistake, honestly. I think he needs to be on this diagonal. Well, I don't have my light square bishop. I can't defend it. Blockade this pawn. Okay. So we might be finally sort of consolidating what is really a dire position. Now I can sink my knight into b6. I want to advance the pawn if I can. I'm going against a rook and two bishops, which is even stronger than a pair of rooks. He has 3 minor pieces, and I have 3 minor pieces, but he has the exchange. In terms of pawns, I have 5 of them, and he has 6. We both have a passed pawn, although his is blockaded and mine has a grand open highway. If he doesn't... Okay, he just moved back. He's just starting to see that maybe he does belong on this diagonal. My queen's position is going to be important. She's not needed anymore. I could put her behind the pawn. Rooks belong behind passed pawns, but in the absence of a rook, the queen might have to do it. If I do come to c2, then I've pinned myself. Knight's on virtually an open board here. At least the light squared one. Again, causing me problems. Gonna have to stay in contact with this knight. Gonna probably have to stay in contact with that knight. I need to shut down this b. He could exchange this off, and then... Okay, let's shut it down the b file. Oh dear, didn't think about the check. Forced. That's game over. Well done, Joel. Wow, that ended fast. Devastating loss. These 1,600 bots can chew you up. Well, so great learning experience for me, though. Lots to learn from this game. Got to look at bishop e6 in the opening. Didn't I say he did that on move 6? I got to look at those types of positions. Really, I got creamed here. Wow, what a beating. Worse beating. Worse beating than I gave to 1,500 bots. Lots of just blind spots in my thinking. I guess the answer was before bearing the knight, and I needed to move my king to g8 to cover. Yeah, but I was already in dire straits. Anyway, thank you. I hope you enjoyed the game. Have a great day.